The morning began with the same comforting tune of routine television, bright lights, polished smiles, and scripted charm. Lorraine Kelly's studio was alive with the soft hum of cameras, crew chatter, and the faint buzz of anticipation. Today was special. The guest wasn't just anyone. It was him, Sir Paul McCartney, the man whose songs had turned generations into dreamers. The man whose lyrics carried heartbreak, rebellion, and hope, all wrapped in melody. Even the crew felt it. That rare mix of reverence and excitement filled the room as Paul walked in, dressed simply, carrying an aura of quiet confidence. Lorraine smiled wide. Almost too wide. "Welcome, Paul. It's been ages." "You still making the young girls scream?" she said, laughing. Paul chuckled. "Always polite, always gracious." "Not sure about that anymore, Lorraine. These days I'm happy if my dog listens." The audience laughed, and for a moment everything felt right. But if you looked closely, there was a flicker behind Lorraine's eyes. A glint of mischief, or maybe malice. She leaned forward. "You know, Paul, a lot of people say the Beatles were lightning in a bottle, that you never really found that magic again." The laughter died. Paul paused, unsure if he'd heard her right. He smiled faintly. "Well, I suppose that magic never really leaves you." "Right." But Lorraine pressed on. "Some might say it did. Your newer albums didn't exactly make history, did they?" A heavy silence spread. The air felt thicker. Paul's expression softened, not angry, but disappointed. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to measure his past against his present. But this time, it felt colder. He adjusted his mic, looked at her kindly, and said, "I make music because I love it. Not because I'm trying to chase ghosts." Lorraine smirked. The audience didn't know it yet, but something had cracked. The tension had begun quiet, invisible, but real. And by the time the next question landed, the storm had already started to form. The air inside the studio shifted, subtle but undeniable. The laughter from the previous moment still echoed faintly, but it felt hollow now. The audience leaned in, sensing something uneasy in Lorraine's tone. She smiled again, but her eyes said something different, calculated, sharp. "You know, Paul," she said lightly, "you've had quite a long career, but do you ever wonder if it's time to step aside? Let the younger ones take the stage." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Even the cameraman hesitated before zooming in. Paul tilted his head, calm as ever. "Music doesn't really have an age, Lorraine," he said. "It's like breathing. You don't stop because someone younger starts." Lorraine laughed, that high-pitched kind of laugh people use when they're trying to sound friendly, but it feels like a slap. "Sure," she said, "but come on, there's a difference between timeless and out of touch." The audience froze. That was the first real blow. Paul blinked slowly. The man who'd performed in front of millions suddenly looked small, framed by bright studio lights that now felt harsh. His voice was gentle but firm. "I think people decide that for themselves, don't they?" Lorraine leaned back, arms crossed. "Maybe, but sometimes legends hang on too long. They forget the world's moved on." Could almost hear the audience's collective intake of breath. No one spoke. No one dared to. Paul looked at her for a moment, not angry, but deeply hurt. "Moved on?" he repeated softly. "I didn't realize music had an expiration date." It wasn't a loud confrontation. It didn't need to be. The weight of those words was enough. Lorraine chuckled again, trying to fill the silence. "Oh, don't take it personally. I just mean you've done enough, haven't you?" Paul exhaled slowly. Enough is a strange word when you love what you do. That line lingered poetic, cutting through her facade like a melody he'd written decades ago. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged glances. This wasn't going to plan. What was supposed to be lighthearted television was turning into something raw, uncomfortable, real. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were witnessing the beginning of something unforgettable. The legend was being tested, and he wasn't going to let disrespect rewrite his story. Lorraine sensed the tension, but instead of easing it, she leaned in. The hunger for control flickered in her tone. She wanted the viral moment, the headline, the clip that would explode across social media. "So," she said, tapping her cue cards with false confidence. "You keep talking about the Beatles and their legacy, but don't you think living in that shadow has stopped you from being, well, relevant?" The word relevant hit like a slap. The audience murmured. Paul's expression hardened, not in anger, but in quiet disbelief. He'd faced critics, politicians, even fan obsessions. But this was different. This was disrespect disguised as journalism. He smiled faintly. "Relevance isn't something I think about. I just try to create something honest. Something that still matters," Lorraine scoffed. "Honest? Maybe. But do people even listen to those songs anymore?" That did it. The audience shifted uncomfortably. One woman in the front row frowned. Another whispered, "That's too far." Paul leaned forward, his voice lower now. "You know, Lorraine, for someone who talks for a living, you seem to forget how to listen." The room fell silent. Even Lorraine froze for a heartbeat. Paul continued softly. "The Beatles weren't about fame. They were about connection. The kind of connection that doesn't need to trend." And for the first time, Lorraine looked unsure. The smirk faded slightly. She'd poked at a man who'd survived everything: fame, loss, tragedy, and time, and still stood with grace. The audience began to clap quietly. A slow, uneasy sound, not for Lorraine, but for him. The unraveling had begun, and it was her composure that was starting to fall apart. Lorraine tried to regain control, but her voice trembled slightly, the kind of tremor that appears when confidence begins to crumble. She forced a laugh. "Oh, come on, Paul. Don't take it so seriously. It's just a bit of fun. You artists can be so sensitive." Paul looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment there was only silence. The lights buzzed overhead, the cameras whirred softly, and the audience waited, unsure which way this would go. He leaned forward. "Fun?" he said quietly. "You call disrespect fun?" The air snapped tight. Lorraine's smirk faltered. "I didn't mean," but Paul stood up. Slowly, deliberately. The sound of his chair sliding back was louder than her words. "You invite people here to talk," he said, his voice steady, "and then mock the very thing that made them who they are." Lorraine stammered. I was only." Paul shook his head. "No, you were trying to make a moment." "Well, congratulations. You just did." The studio was frozen. You could hear someone exhale in the back row. Paul adjusted his jacket, gave a small nod to the crew, a silent thank you, and turned toward the exit. The camera stayed on him as he walked off the set. No shouting, no dramatics, just a quiet, powerful walkout that said more than words ever could. Lorraine sat there, its eyes wide, mouth half open, her cue cards trembling in her hands. For the first time, she didn't know what to say. The audience didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just watched him leave, the man who'd given the world music, now giving them a lesson in dignity. Within hours, the clip exploded online. What began as a quiet morning show moment turned into a digital wildfire. Hashtags flooded every platform. Hashtag Paul walks out. Hashtag respect the legend. Hashtag Lorraine. Disaster. Millions watched the clip on loop, dissecting every second. Some defended Lorraine, calling it just entertainment, but most weren't buying it. "You don't talk to Sir Paul McCartney like that," one viral tweet read. Racking up over 1 million likes, tabloids went into overdrive. Lorraine, humiliated on live TV, screamed one headline. Another asked, "Has morning TV lost its soul?" The show's producers scrambled for damage control. But the internet had already chosen its side, and it wasn't hers. Clips of Paul leaving the set were turned into edits, with Beatles songs playing softly in the background. Let It Be, The Long and Winding Road, even Hey Jude. Each version made the moment feel even more cinematic, almost poetic. Meanwhile, Lorraine faced backlash like never before. Petitions called for her suspension, while former guests came forward sharing their own uncomfortable experiences. What was meant to be a playful interview had spiraled into a public reckoning, but Paul, he stayed silent. No tweets, no interviews, just silence, which made him look even more graceful. That silence became his loudest message. and when he finally appeared a few days later smiling, calm, and performing at a charity concert, the crowd erupted. Thousands cheered, not just for his music, but for the way he handled himself. The legend had walked away. But his dignity had stayed. The media had tried to create chaos. Instead, they reminded the world why some names will always deserve respect. Asterisk. 3 days later, Lorraine Kelly sat alone in her dressing room, staring at her reflection. The confident morning host who once ruled the airwaves now looked small. The world outside her studio had turned on her headlines, hashtags, and even former colleagues calling her out. Her phone buzzed non-stop, but every message felt the same. You went too far. Producers insisted she make a public apology. First she resisted. It's being blown out of proportion, she argued. But when the network's PR head walked in with a grim face and said, "Lorraine, sponsors are pulling out," reality hit hard. The next morning, she sat under the same studio lights, but this time there was no smile, no charm, just the weight of regret. "I want to address what happened with Sir Paul McCartney," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "In the moment, I tried to be witty, but I crossed the line. It was disrespectful, and I'm truly sorry." She paused, her eyes glistening. "Interviewing legends means more than getting views. It means showing respect, something I failed to do." The apology went viral instantly, but not the way she hoped. Comments poured in. "She's only sorry because she got caught. It's too little too late." She lost her class the moment she mocked him. And through it all, Paul stayed silent once again. No response, no statement. Just the quiet confidence of a man who didn't need to fight back to win. Lorraine's apology might have been scripted, but Paul's dignity had already written the ending when the internet wouldn't forget anytime soon. Weeks passed, but the echo of that moment never faded. What was supposed to be just another morning interview had become a cultural turning point, a reminder of how far modern media had drifted from respect. Clips of Paul's quiet walkout continued circulating, now stitched into tribute videos that celebrated his decades-long career. Comments flooded in from fans of all ages. He handled it like a true gentleman. That's what grace looks like. Legends don't need to shout. Meanwhile, Lorraine's show ratings took a sharp dive. Viewers who once tuned in for comfort now turned away, calling it cruel entertainment. Networks began rethinking the formula. Maybe shock value wasn't worth the public's trust after all. But Paul never mentioned it again. Not in interviews, not on stage. Instead, he poured his energy into something purer: music. A few months later, he surprised everyone with a heartfelt acoustic performance dedicated to the people who still believe in kindness. No one needed to ask who it was really for. In that moment, the noise of controversy faded, replaced by something timeless. It's the kind of silence that only true legends command. The story wasn't about who won the exchange. It was about something deeper, the difference between attention and respect, between fame and legacy. Lorraine chased a headline. Paul became one. And while one name trended for all the wrong reasons, the other quietly reminded the world what humility sounds like. Because in an age built on chaos and clicks, dignity will always be the loudest voice in the room. Before you scroll away, think about what this story really showed us. In a world obsessed with trending moments and viral drama, one man reminded us that silence can be stronger than shouting, that dignity still matters. Paul didn't need to clap back, expose, or argue. He did what real legends do. He walked away with grace. And that's why people are still talking about him, long after the camera stopped rolling. If you believe respect should never go out of style, if you believe character is louder than controversy, then this channel is where you belong. We tell the stories they tried to twist, show you the truth behind the spotlight. So hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and join a community that values emotion over ego and legacy over likes. Because in the end, fame fades, but grace echoes forever.